Hello and good morning. It's good to see everybody. We're going to do some quick introductions. I'm going to warn you right now, we're not going to do full bios, but please make sure that you look at our pamphlets or the program to see the amazing accomplishments of our panelists today. But when we dreamt up this panel, we were inspired by communities showing up for each other time and time again. Amidst catastrophes and the importance of cash as a tool to move families from acute crisis to rebuilding. We've seen how community mobilization, mutual aids, and networks of neighbors have been impactful in ways to fight back, whether it's ICE and the mass deportations. And today we'll discuss the role cash has had in that ongoing crisis with Jose Quinonez, Executive Director of the Mission Asset Fund. Welcome. I do that. Thank you. At the same time, cities across the country have been using direct cash in the face of climate disaster, from the Cash Fund in Hawaii, giving relief to the residents in Maui, and the pivotal response of direct cash to the wildfires in LA. And joining us to discuss the role cash has played amidst the public crisis here in Texas over the last number of years, facing from deportation to the historic flooding, is Carmen Pulido, the founding executive director of Go Austin, Vamos Austin, or GABA. And I'll just say quickly, we hope to have one of the elder leaders from GABA joining us on stage today and being able to share from our firsthand experience. Wasn't able to make it because she's doing some very important community work, and I'll just let Carmen just say a few words around Sue, who was originally going to be with us today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor, and it's great to see so many faces I recognize and others I don't. One being Ivana Neri, who was part of GAVA early on before we were a nonprofit. So I'm the founding executive director since 2018, but actually we started an initiative way back. And one of the elders in our community, Sue Redding, is who I was hoping would be here today to share. And she's actually supporting a community member because she was an emergency contact for somebody, an elder who sadly passed away in her old neighborhood. And she is helping the family members of that neighbor and assisting them to get everything that they need to support each other in this time. And so it's just a clear example of, you know, a lot of us in this room probably are those community connectors. And so we're thinking of Sue and her neighbor today.
Well said, Carmen, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say she's doing exactly what we're talking about today. So before we can really get going into this weathering crisis component, it's important to note what was built and how. How did your organizations develop programs in the context of your community, and how did you design them to support people equitably in a way that could even be used for rapid response later? Maybe Jose, you want to kick us off?
Yes, for sure. Thank you for having me here. It's really an honor to, come and share our story of the Mission Asset Fund. Everything we do starts with really grounding ourselves with our values. And for us, the way we articulate that is about, meeting people where they are and building on what is good in their lives. And then what that means is about, well, you have to show up. When something happens, show up. And when you show up to help people in whatever crisis there may be, you have to figure out how to do more. So I say, show up, do more. And when you're doing more, you also have to think about how can you do it better. So those are the three things: show up, do more, and do better. And for me, every time there's a new crisis or different crisis, or even just thinking about how to help people in their day-to-day life, it's like, well, what can we do? And then you have to show up. You have to have conversations with them. You have to figure out how can we add to what already is happening in people's lives, what they're already doing to survive, and how can we do it better. And so for the Mission Asset Fund, when we got to the point of distributing emergency grants, the first time we did that was in 2017, when there was a moment of crisis when the first Trump administration wanted to eradicate DACA. They wanted to eliminate DACA within a month. And so with that time, we actually had a loan product to help people apply for DACA, to renew their DACA. But in the moment of saying, oh my God, this thing is going to go away within the month, we've basically turned our loan servicing platform into an emergency grants platform. Because traditionally, we are a CDFI, we provide loans, zero interest loans, we do lending circles, small business loans, immigration loans, but in that moment, we knew that loans was not what people needed. They actually needed cash. They needed grants to do this immediately. And so, overnight, we sort of transformed ourselves to do that. And then during COVID, that was another huge emergency, as we all know and felt. And so we had to do it again. And even now, we have a new program called ALMA to help immigrants that are being impacted by ICE, that are being deported or detained, and their families are being impacted financially. So we, again, sort of created a program to provide people with up to $3,000 with emergency grants to help them in this moment of crisis. And so the idea is about how do we use our infrastructure and what they need at that moment. So it's not and there was a question about how do you do it better, time and time again.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jose. Carmen?
Sure. So at GAVA, we are organizers. We're a network of organizers. We work with a lot of organizers in town. And so when I very first heard of UpTogether, back when it was Family Independence Initiative, I remember meeting with Jesus and saying, so tell me about these, so you form cohorts that can actually, and he stopped me and said, families self-organize. And I went, oh, okay, I'm talking to an organizer, this is good. And I say that because GAVA began as a childhood obesity initiative. It was actually catalyzed by a funder here, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, and they embedded community organizing in it from the beginning. I don't think they actually knew what they were getting into because they knew we were going to address the lack of access to healthy food and safe physical activity opportunities in certain neighborhoods where we saw disproportionate rates of obesity and chronic disease. But by incorporating an organizing lens, eventually enough of us organizers from here infiltrated and turned it into an even more upstream, looking at what is often called non-medical drivers of health, but really all the conditions where we live, work, worship, and play, right, and how that contributes to our health. I first learned that in the environmental justice movement. I came up in this city as an East Austin and Central Austin environmental justice organizer, a youth with an amazing intergenerational community that taught me about the root causes of our issues. And so that's the lens we've applied as we've gone from healthy food and physical activity to also being these areas were devastated. The neighborhoods we work in were devastated by 2 catastrophic floods in the first 5 years of our work, and they're also disproportionately impacted by heat, particularly in North Austin. So we've addressed climate resilience, we've addressed all of these issues, and along the way, this has become a really incredible tool. Ivana and I were actually in conversation before the pandemic hit about, hey, what would it look like to push the city to pilot spending, let's say, $1 million of social service spending, contract spending on unconditional cash transfers. And I went, that's a cool idea. And we were starting to talk about it, right? So we were already in the process of looking at how we might partner, and bam, the pandemic hit. And everybody's figuring out what to do. And here we already had some tools. Let's just see. I think I can squeeze $5,000 to do a few of these cash transfers, right? And it built this bridge that then we ended up being, GAVA, through our coalition and networks, we ended up distributing over $380,000 in cash in 2020 through the city of Austin. Thank you. It was kind of amazing because it represented probably like, a third of our budget at the time, like maybe 20%, and we've grown since then. And obviously it was unprecedented, and it hasn't been like that since, but we have continued to use this tool in different ways, and it is what facilitates adaptation of the front lines, people who know exactly how to respond in the moment.
I absolutely 100% agree, and I think something that all 3 organizations carry in common is this fact that we've always been centered at the community in the way that they're organizing themselves and being led so that when these moments happen, we're really responding with them rather than trying to figure out what's happening and how can we, what are the critical questions at the table. No, those questions already have been answered and at times are already being in the process of being answered. It just accelerates the moment to be able to respond. So you both have been doing this deep community work, and in many cases, you are already providing what institutions are failing to in that sense, right? Like communities are bridging where institutions are failing, and our organizations then are in support of those community members. How were you able to deploy cash quickly to those who needed it when the moment called for it? Was the distribution method critical? And what have organizers and on-the-ground leaders learned about trust, dignity, and cash from communities navigating crisis conditions right now? Maybe Carmen, and then we'll go to Jose.
Sure. I'm going to try to model the leadership quality of brevity in answering those three questions. In short, the network, the net that works, right? So 10, 15 years of organizing in the same neighborhoods, you build a lot of connections with whether it's the schools, the neighborhoods, the elders, the youth, ideally you're bringing new people in. And so we did already have a network, but we also know who we are and who we are not and where we are not. And we also know who's in our neighborhood that we're not always reaching. And so we also, of that 380,000 I mentioned, and even lately, when we've gotten other sources of emergency fund for climate emergencies, we're connecting to those who we know who are active in refugee communities, in multilingual communities that speak Arabic, Pashto, Dari. There are amazing multi-generational Black-led organizations here in Austin that have been holding really close networks that we've passed money through to the Immigrant Support Fund with Austin Mutual Aid, and we have these relational networks that allow us to vet and have trust with who we're giving cash to make sure that it's actually getting to directly impacted community. It's never perfect. We've had intensive debrief and evaluation among our organizing team. We've had transparent conversations, sometimes difficult conversations with our community about how this works, right? Because it changes the dynamic. We didn't start community organizing and giving out money. And we're not just giving out money, right? We're recognizing that people are circulating resources in ways that amplify their efforts. But it also changes the dynamic. There were people who came into contact with GAVA for the very first time under the guise of cash assistance, not understanding that we were embedded community organizers working deeply on infrastructural issues and policy, but it also was a pathway to start conversations. Some of the most powerful leaders in our childcare networks came to us through the pandemic, and because we maintained a relationship with them and kept interest in their issues, they have been at the core of the advocacy that got us a $75 million county fund for childcare. There's still a lot of work to get that money to the people, but that's how we leverage, right? That's how and these home-based and the childcare providers who provide the majority of care for the kids in our neighborhoods but are not on the radar, they see everything that's happening, right? And so if you put the resources there, they immediately go out into the community. They are immediately leveraged. So trusting that process and taking the bad with the good.
I love it. Jose, what would you add?
Well, I'm not sure what to add. I mean, I think it's all about trust. So I completely agree with that. And I think trust is something that, that actually happens as a result of. So it's not a thing. It's like it happens as a result of the relationships you build, right? You can have bad relationships, that means they have less trust. You have good relationships, that means you have more trust. So, for MAF, over the years, we've had an ongoing, conversation, deep listening to what is happening in people's lives. And then from that, we learn. We've tried to figure out, well, what can we do more, right? And the way I describe what we do at MAF is that we're putting the best of technology and the best of finance in the service of poor people. That's what we do, right? And so we're always trying to figure out, well, what more can we do in terms of what is the best of finance and the best of technology? And then that's how we adapt, or that's how we innovate, that's how we create a lot of different products and services. So we're not a one solution shop. We have a lot of different solutions already built in within the MAF infrastructure. So I mentioned, our campaign to help DACA Dreamers renew their status in 2017, and then we quickly pivoted to grants, and we raised, I think, something close to like $5 million to deploy that, to over like 15,000, Dreamers at that time. During COVID, we actually deployed more than like $75 million in emergency one-time $500 grants. I mean, it was an incredible feat to do that across the country. And in Alma right now, we have about a little bit over $2 million to help people that are being ICE impacted. But for us, it's about building, oh, thank you. It's about channeling resources to the people that could most benefit, for a one-time grant. So even the way we thought about this, like, well, that's a different way of sort of saying, like, oh, let's just give out this money to first come, first serve, or do it on a lottery basis. I mean, we kind of used our technology infrastructure, to really assess, well, who could actually make the most good from this one-time grant, and so that way we can actually have the intelligence to do that properly and at scale. I mean, and so that took all of our infrastructure, right? And the way we did, the idea, and I want to get into this idea because I think it's important, is developing, we developed something we call the financial equity framework to basically help us decide, well, who to help or not to help. I mean, because there was a moment where, our servers actually crashed by the number of applications that were coming in at people who needed help. It crashed, and so very quickly, we had to deploy another server, because we were just flooded with, applications. So we had all this immense data from people all over the country, and then we had to figure out, well, how do you help? Who do you help first? And so through this framework, this equity framework, we were able to sort of select people that, again, that could do the most good, with this one-time intervention. And there we looked at questions like well, looked at structural barriers. We looked at people that, we actually quantified the income streams that were coming into different households. And then we also looked at the number of strains that were actually impacted in that household based on the application flow. And then based on that, we were able to sort of select, here are the people, the families that could be them, that could do the most good with this intervention. And so that allowed us to actually do it a lot more equitable, rather than, well, whoever, hit submit first, or whoever was there on a lottery basis. We were like more, I guess, intentional, our interventions. So there was a lot more learning in that regard, but from the idea of using, our technology to help us make those decisions better, we actually, I think, we're able to support the people that otherwise wouldn't have gotten any support.
I love that. And I think similarly for us at UpTogether, having that technology was critical. I think also going through a process of growth where, especially for us, we were like, you know what, historically we always asked for more documentation that was needed, and going through a process to eliminate some of that documentation, making it easy to deploy. And similarly, when the pandemic hit, I think that the first thing that we said to ourselves was like, before we even start a fund to be able to deploy money directly to people, we already have money in the bank that have been committed to people. They're gonna need it. Let's get that money out now. And I think that urgency too of the moment, which you all are also speaking to, is like what resources we have, how quickly we can deploy them, and how do we rely on community to be able to assist us in that deployment. And if you do that, you're already 3 steps ahead of most people. Some incredible learnings. Take a step back and just say, as we think about today's crisis, or the poly crisis, as we've been using the term because there's so much coming at us at all times, to the longer term vision of guaranteed income as a permanent floor of economic security. Jose, what do you see and what are you thinking as we take that long-term view?
I mean, that's a big question. I think we definitely need a whole day conference to address that. I mean, I think for us, again, we think about, helping people with cash as just a start. It's not a one-off product. It's not a one-off intervention. It's not a one-time touch point, and then we walk away. This is the start of a relationship, right, with our clients. And so we say, here's some support, and here's additional support, and here's, financial education, financial coaching. Here's another product to help you build and improve your credit score. Here's another product to help, access citizenship applications or apply for or a visa and so forth. So the idea is not a one-time engagement, but it's a start of a conversation about what else that they need, right? And if we don't have the products for them, well, here's a referral. Here's another set of organizations, another set of supports that they can have. Because the way we think about that is that, cash is important. It's fundamental to everything, right? So that's not an innovation, or it's not something new. It's not like a newsworthy press release. It's like we all know that. People know that. Our clients know that. Poor people know that. The question is like, how can you build upon their issues so that they can feel an improvement, a material improvement in their financial lives, so that they can keep going the next day, and they can keep going the day after that. Because for some of our clients, we talked about poly crisis. Paying rent at the end of the month is a crisis. Like that's a crisis in and of itself. So how do you show up for that? So it's not about having this big conversations about everything. It's more like, no, let's bring it down to size, have the products and services in ability to engage people and at that level, so that they can feel ready to tackle the life the next day. And so for us, that's the way we kind of build it up, right? And then we've seen that. We have a lot of data to actually demonstrate that people feel more confident, they feel more in control of their financial lives. And just recently, we actually did this study where we actually used a questionnaire by the World Health Organization. They call it the WHO-5. And I know a lot of researchers in the room know about the WHO-5. Yeah? WHO-5? No? Okay.
No.
It's a really simple questionnaire, 5 questions that has already been vetted the world over about how the people are feeling, about their state of life, their emotional state of being. And then we basically took those questions and asked our clients, well, how are you feeling about this stuff? And then what we found was, like one of the questions, like, do you feel rested? How did you sleep? How well did you sleep? It's like that type of questionnaire, right? And we found, of the people that we were helping with cash and also financial coaching, that there was statistically significant difference of them feeling rested, that they were feeling like they were able to sleep better than the people that were not receiving cash. Why? Because we kind of took that away, that stressor away for just a little short while. And in that while, they were rested. To me, it might not seem like an important thing, but it's like that is significant, right? Because if you want people to join you in a battle for this or that issue, it's like you need to have your soldiers rested. You need to have them feel like they can actually live life, right? So that they can have the space and to think about the bigger political issues and so forth, so that they can join you in that struggle. Because if they're, in the moment of stress, they can't even sleep, how can they think about everything else within that, right? So to me, that's a really significant finding, and what kind of speaks to the importance of our engagement, importance of cash, importance of stability, but that's just a start. Right, and then from there we can build on something greater.
I love that, Jose. Absolutely, and I'll add quickly to say, I think that this moment and the fact that everything has been torn and destroyed that could help cash people who are struggling, and oftentimes organizations like ours are helping replace those failures. There's an opportunity to build again anew in a way that matches our values, as well as gives and honors people's time and their ability to rest, to enjoy. We've taken those things out of our society. We don't put value, we don't put money behind it, and that's exactly what we need to do as we imagine whatever happens next into whether it's policy or our electoral elected officials. But all that to say, we don't want our movement to only react to disasters, though. How can cash actually support communities in becoming more climate resilient and personally resilient? Maybe, Carmen, you can shed some light there.
Sure. Well, resilience has been a big buzzword, hasn't it, for a while? It was, even in GAVA's trajectory, we are organizers, but we are operating in the nonprofit world. We move a lot with the philanthropic winds, and so we get accustomed to these buzzwords. And resilience got to be a really big one in the last 10 years. And at a certain point, we got to define this to even have a conversation, right? So we were actually starting conversations in GAVA's most flood-prone areas in Southeast Austin to talk about response and responsibility. How do we personally respond when there is a shock or a stressor, and how do we take responsibility? How do we take responsibility for preparing ourselves, getting enough sleep, looking out for those things, which is tough when you're, squeezed, but also how do we take responsibility for those that we care about, for those who are more vulnerable in our household, in our neighborhood, right? And then how do our institutions respond? And how do they take responsibility? Where are their responsibilities? How do our institutions take responsibilities for 80 or 100 or 500 years of systemic inequities, especially when they're human beings living through the crisis as well? And so what we saw in let's say, Winter Storm Uri, right? We had been doing disaster preparedness work for years prior to Uri, but we, like most disasters, a lot of things didn't get implemented until after there was a lot of loss and chaos. What we saw at the community level, just like in the city, is that flexible cash allows people to make use of their discretion in the moment. It aids decision making, right? It reduces decision fatigue, and it allows you to triage. I think we get caught up in our institutional talk sometimes. It's a very engineering sort of if X, then Y, clear conditions. If you plug in this money, you get this output, right? We're not living in clear or complicated times. We're in complex and chaotic times, right? And there's a reason that I sense certain enthusiasm. Every time this comes up, it's women of color who are immediately like, yes, sometimes you have to act first, then respond, then triage, then categorize, right? You have to act and then sense, right? And we have to be able to use our intuition. And our structures create our options. So flexible cash allows us to act in that moment, to do the thing, to prevent the loss, to keep the system going before everything breaks down. And just like in the community, at the city level, it was our allies at Watershed Protection, at the Office of Sustainability and Resilience. They were the ones pulling out the debit cards and the flex cash and getting water on a Cap Metro bus sent to our volunteers who have, informal resilience hubs in their communities. They made it happen. And of course, we ran into the after-action reports and it's a complicated order because you want people to just trust folks. And yet, we know all the issues with that, right? But in these moments of crisis, there are also opportunities to prove the concept that actually, yes, when you trust people on the front lines and give them the discretion, whether that's the flexible cash to buy what you need, or maybe it's just the permission to open up the facility to create a space for community to do its work, right? When you have a chief medical officer at the hospital district who says, yeah, how can we help your food cooperative with our facilities? That opens a lot of doors. So the cash gives us the proof of concept that that's what works in chaotic times, and we are in chaotic times.
Cash works. So I think that should be the headline, right? I mean, it shouldn't be, because we all know that. One of the other findings that I think is worth noting here is that it's not just cash, so we did this a deeper study where we actually looked at families in California and other families that looked exactly like them in Texas. So we did a comparison between Texas and California. Imagine that. But in our study, we looked at comparing apples to apples, families that looked exactly alike, of people that were helping through our COVID rapid response, and then so what we found was that families that were helping in Texas were 4 times more likely to get evicted than families that were exactly alike, and then the families in California. And so we thought, wait a minute, what is happening here? Because we're all, giving them the same level of support over the same level of time. Why is it that people in Texas are getting more, experiencing more evictions or shutoffs of utilities as well than people in California? And so we realized that it wasn't about the cash. It was actually about the protections, the consumer protections policies that were actually happening in California or different cities and different counties that were actually keeping families housed. And so there we realized, so it's not just cash, it's also consumer protections that are universal, that are also just as important in keeping people housed or keeping the lights on or keeping the water running. And so that infrastructure is just as important, right? So here, to me, this was an important finding to kind of say, like, yes, cash is important, but it's not the only thing. So we can't just end the conversation there or think that that's the only and all be all, because we also have to think about everything else around what's happening in people's lives to help them stay housed, and keep moving forward in their lives. So everything's interconnected, right? But sometimes our advocacy, sometimes we kind of hone in on this one solution or one idea, and then that's it. It's like, no, that's not it. There's a lot of other things happening in people's lives that we have to be aware of or understand, so that way we can actually help better.
That is good stuff. Very well said. Good stuff. I spent part of my career in Boston, and I started with youth organizing, and I had a mentor who, anytime we started an organizing campaign, would be like, all right, so who's your villain? Because we always need, somebody is doing something wrong, and we need to make sure that people understand who that is and hold them accountable. So we've learned that winning economic narratives need strong villains. What villains are keys to the crisis your communities face, and how can we name them to advance cash policies?
Well, I had a nice complex answer in our pre-work about private equity and just extractive wealth practices that are sucking the resources out of our community. But in the spirit of naming names, I mean, we have two of the PayPal mafia living here in Austin now. And one of whom, Luke Nosek, is married to Nicole Nosek, who, this is just one example of people who have actually invested deeply in the deregulatory policies of our land development code, of our ability to negotiate protections for renters, housing preservation, affordability, environmental protection. And I'm gonna say this because I have a microphone. I'm in the middle of the stage, and there are no YIMBY neoliberal trickle-down supply-side housing activists to shut me up right now. But it's real, because right now I'm not at city council. My colleague and the few people who even know what's up today, Home 3.0, another deregulatory master avoidance of planned unit developments. That's just jargon for saying now we can have a developer develop 2,000 plus acres of land without a negotiation about flooding, about infrastructure, about affordability, about anti-displacement, these critical things. And why? Because these policies are being written by the investor class. The money didn't go anywhere, right? It's not gone from our economy. It's all sitting, funneled, and getting extracted, and we have multiple layers of government, including the blue team, right, who are pro-deregulation, who are still selling us Reaganomics repackaged as market-based solutions on a 20th century economic framework when we're in the 21st century, right? We're going by the Gregorian clock, right? So we can agree that it's Thursday. We call it Thursday here, right? So why are we still on a 20th century model that assumes that the resources are infinite, that we haven't overshot 6 of the 9, ecological domains, all of those things, and that we need those WHO 5, we need those basic things that support us. So here we are, step by step, triaging as we keep the line of sight for a more transformative circular economy that really is where we came from, right? It's just going back to where we came from.
And you have to follow that, Jose.
I agree. I mean, I think we have to be aware that, of the villains, because there's so many, right? Like, we can start naming them, and we're going to need 2-day conference to go through the list. And I think we have to be aware of that. But I think, the way I like to start is to thinking about, well, our villain sometimes is personal. Sometimes it's our own ignorance, is our own assumptions, bad assumptions, even about the people we're helping. Because sometimes we kind of come into the communities thinking like, oh, I am your savior. You bow before, or you should be thankful. And like that's one of the villains in our industry. When we think that we're like the ones that have all the answers because we went to all the fancy schools and read all the fancy books, right? Thinking that we have the answers that they need, and so and to me that is like one of my personal villains, if you will. because that's actually not true, because that actually it deprives our clients of agency, it deprives them of their humanity, it deprives them of even recognizing the things that they're already doing to survive without us. And so, so when I call that out, I basically say, like, let's put all that stuff aside. Of course we bring something to the table. Of course we know a thing or two about the world, right? But so do they. Sometimes clients are more politically savvy than we are. They know more about the villains in our world than we do, right? They understand because they have to do that in order to survive. So when putting that aside, then we can have a real conversation about, well, how can we really help? How can we really support? How can we bring more resources and solutions that are actually meaningful, not just rhetorical, but meaningful in people's lives, so that they can sleep better, so that they can be ready for another day, right? And so, so to me, that's really critical, because sometimes when we, spend a lot of time and our attention and emotional energy on this other stuff, I mean, again, it's important, but sometimes we might lose the mark, if you will, in that moment. And so, so I kind of, again, I wanted to say that outright, because we have to keep ourselves in check once in a while, so that way we can try to be more, responsive to the needs of people in real time. I want to say I love this side of the room, by the way. This other side, you guys have to step it up in your clapping engagement.
We got a lot of cameras over here, but we need
right.
more. Yeah,
That's right. I
What
love
is
that.
happening over there?
So please, yeah, we are from the right side.
I know.
I know. What I would add, and I think both gave a really great, complete understanding of who are we talking to. And again, the theme here, as you continue to hear, is community will lead us and show what is the conversation. One thing that I will add, though, that I know that we can do better is the narrative on the other side is villainizing our communities, using our values against us. And I do think that we have an opportunity to name and hold our values stronger and define them and not be afraid of them, because that narrative is being taken away from us unfairly. And it is our job to make sure that people understand, actually, no, we care for families. We care for this country more than anybody else, because we knew the true values of its founding, as unjust as they were and on the people's back that they have benefited. But there's a huge opportunity to be able to do so, and that we can't let them take away from us in that way. I hear you. All right, so I'm going to stay on course. Climate disasters don't check voter registrations, Texas floods, LA wildfires, disaster generally hit across political lines. Has that changed who shows up to the conversation about cash in your communities? And what does that tell us about who this movement can reach? What is the opportunity there? Carmen?
Well, this is where the messaging and the narrative work is so critical, right? I mean, you just underscored it. And it's also where it's very difficult, because politics is so binary often when you get to the voting booth, and even on our local city council, which is supposed to be nonpartisan, by the way. So when people run as Democrats or Republicans, you should be asking questions on either side. I think that it has become a bit of a political football. It's become wrapped up in the question of trust in general of our governments, as much as of regular folks. And so I think that there is an opportunity to, I mean, the nice thing is that people distrust the government from all sides of the political spectrum. So sometimes you just need a common distrust, right? A place to work from. And I'm being a little facetious, but actually I mean that in the sense that I was a mayoral candidate 2 years ago, and I had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people who identify in various places on the political spectrum. And of course, as cliche as it sounds, most people agree on most of the basic quality of life issues, right? Even when we look at a really, the most expensive police contract we've ever had in our history that has caused us to have a tax rate election to pay for basic items, right? Even if you talk to the most pro-police person, that contract didn't staff a single additional officer. It gave no expectations for actual, police showing up to the job. So that's not to defend a pro-police standpoint. That's just to tell you that there's commonality. And so really what we're talking about is outcomes. What are the outcomes? And if you can stay out of the tactical, how much cash you gave to this many people, what were the actual outcomes that you saw? What was the lives saved, property saved, right? Systems that worked better. And I think the actors in those spaces they'll find alignment regardless of how they're voting.
I definitely have seen the shift, of organizations, politicians, or just as a solutions, like, yes, cash, give people cash. In California, that's happening a lot more. And I think this is a really great opportunity to further the conversation or push the conversation even further than that. To basically kind of say that, that a government needs to be doing, helping people more directly in a lot more ways. And I think that that's something that, we might be in a tipping point in that conversation. Because, typically government, relies on a bunch of different intermediaries to help people, right? They contract out, they have companies, they have organizations, they have layers of different entities before money or support goes to the actual, person or the family. And I think that's something that is based on, one of my villains that I like to name out is like, the whole neoliberal thinking that government is not, a player in that. Or that only corporations or organizations can do that. And I think we need to kind of challenge that to say, like, no, government can be a source for good and have a direct connection with people and support. And we see that all over the world as well, where governments are going directly with supports. And I think it's starting to show that it's actually the better way of doing it. Because I think the idea that cash can only happen through nonprofits, I think we will be short-sighting ourselves if that is the case. Because it could happen through government a lot more directly and faster. And we actually saw that during COVID, right? You might remember, right, where all the stimulus checks were happening, and then that's when we saw that that the rate of poverty amongst children halved. Like, we will never be able to do that ourselves, but the federal government did it. They did it for like a year, maybe 2 years, and then it went away. But that was the proof point that it can actually happen, but it can happen like that, where supports and resources can go directly to people instead of going through intermediary after intermediary, where a lot of the resources kind of get lost in the shuffle, right? So I think we can start pushing the conversation in that direction, so that we can say, yes, we demonstrated that cash is good, cash is needed, people need it in order to survive, but we need to do it a lot more efficiently, a lot more effective, and do it a better way, and government has a role to play in that regard. So I think we need to evolve our conversations to kind of push that type of solution so that it can have a lasting impact in people's lives.
Really well said. I can't stress enough that I think no matter what your political line is, when you sit in front of people who have benefited from direct cash, whether it's to overcome a crisis or a moment of crisis, or have been able to do it over a consistent amount of time and the impact that it has in their lives, and a lot of what you all have been talking about around, like, whether it's time and the effort or looking for your neighbor, it begins to break down walls. One of the things that I will add, though, is that I actually see whether it is, so on that side, yes, like it works, but on the other side, the waters are receding, right? In every way, I don't think, no matter what your political stance is, people are being so much more conservative and bucketing their dollars when we have this abundance amount of evidence that this works. And we need to get out of the way and start finding creative ways to put this cash back in people's hands. With that, the current government is failing families more than in recent memory. How can communities still rely on one another while also showing families what the government can and should work for them? And start with you, Jose.
I mean, there's no question that right now we're living under unprecedented times where government, is not our friend. Can I say that here? Yeah. In fact, they're attacking us. We're under siege. Our communities are being preyed upon. There are active campaigns going after undocumented people, people of color, people that just, and that fear and anxiety is real in people's lives. And so I want to just stress that. So right now, that is the reality. I believe that this is not going to be the reality forever, right? There will be a moment where that is going to change. And I have to hold on to that belief because that's what kind of gives me hope, right? That we are actively changing it, we're actively working, but we know that this is not a reality forever. So in this moment, we still have to show up. We have to have a relationship with clients. We have to, let them know that we're here. We need to send messages of love and care to know that we see them, that we're here to help. Because when things turn, we want to do more with them, right? And then hopefully we'll have a government that is not attacking us, a government that can actually help. And if that is the case, then the question is going to be about, well, what can we do? What are the policies? What are the programs? What are the things that we can actually do to do things at scale? So we need to prepare for ourselves, at that moment. But right now, it is pretty dark, and so we have to remember that and show up understanding that so that we can at least help them sleep better, at the very least, and then prepare ourselves for when the moment changes.
In the words of my dear friend, late friend, Elandria Williamson of the Highlander Center, organize, organize, organize. That's what we have to do, and it's exhausting, and not all of us can do policy all the time, not all of us can do triage work all the time, not all of us can be building the capital stack for the next big community land trust or long-term vision, but we have to be doing all of it. So we do it in network, and we have to have some degree of stability to thrive. And I just want to share a quick anecdote from Sue because she wasn't able to be here. Sue's participation in this program came after knowing her for over a decade, getting pedestrian improvements in her neighborhood, the first healthy corner store that we've ever did in South Austin. And this allowed her to stay in her home for the year that it took to plan her transition to move closer to her daughter and not lose her house. And she was able to tend to a garden. She was able to not just grow for herself, but for neighbors. She started purchasing soap-making materials, making soaps out of loofah she grew in the garden, and starting to sell this. And she actually said, if I'd had a little more time and maybe a little more focus on the budgeting piece, I could actually turn this into something, right? But that connection point was all born from that stability, that calm, and that ability to connect with people and move at the natural pace of life. And I think that's going to be the key for all of us, caring for ourselves so we can come together and really make the changes at the policy level that we need.
Love it. Organize, organize, and continue to, whether it's an immediate crisis of climate, whether it's an immediate crisis of government, we know that not only community is ready to act and that they have the networks of support to be able to do so, but that they also rely on organizations who are already on the ground, have built connections and trust, so that money can move quickly and let them do what they do best, which is care for one another. And it's something that we just don't get to talk enough about. Really appreciate, as you can imagine, when I first met Jose and then Carmen, I was like, these are kindred spirits. I never would have dreamt that we get to do a panel together, but here we are. Thank you so much for being with us today and for participating in this important conversation.
Appreciate it.